So I think I finally figured out how Unity works. By that I mean I've been at it for about a year and I'm starting to come to grips with how to think in Unity. So I'm not thinking like a game designer or a programmer or an artist. I'm just thinking about making things in Unity, kind of like it's my tool. So I want to share some of that. I want to impart some of the things or tricks or whatever it is that I've come across, because I feel like nobody's giving you this kind of information. And so I feel like if I was starting out again, it would be useful for me to have this. So I want to be useful to you. And if this is not the kind of thing you're interested in, then go somewhere else. So the first step is to get familiar with Unity, and we're going to dig in and we're going to figure out the basics. I'm going to build a foundation assuming you've done nothing with Unity other than install it. If you haven't installed Unity, go install Unity right now. Get it on. I've got 5.3.5 or 5.3. 5.4 is not out yet. So go do that. All right. I'm going to assume you've done that now. I'm going to assume that I just switched over to, yeah, okay. So here's our Unity start thing. We're just making a brand new project. Unity uses projects. We're going to say new. I'm going to call it, this is going to be for a YouTube series, so I'm going to call it YouTube project. And I'm going to move it because my C drive is full. So I'm going to change the location where all of the assets are going to live. I'm going to select my stuff folder, and I'm going to make just a video or a folder called YouTube, and select folder. I have the option here between 2D and 3D. What that does for me is it sets some defaults in Unity. It doesn't do too much crazy other than like how the camera gets set up or when you're making a new scene. I'm going to leave it at 3D because Unity's built for 3D, but we'll get into 2D at some point probably. I don't know. This might be the only video. We'll see. For asset packages, I'm going to pick characters. So asset packages are going to be like any assets, and if you don't know what an asset is, you can go look up what an asset is. It's essentially any component of your game that's going to be music, art, animation, scripting, all of the guts of your stuff that could be in your game are going to be assets. So we're going to steal the characters package as a default asset. So if you installed Unity, this should already be there. I'm going to click done, and I'm going to create this project. And now we wait. Okay, we are back. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change our window layout. This is the default window layout, but I got this little goofy picture of me. I think it's more useful. I used to do videos where you didn't have a picture of me, but I feel like if you can't see my face, then you don't, I don't know. Anyway, vanity. Woo. So we're gonna change the layout of these windows. So we're gonna hop over here to layout. We're gonna click the 2x3 split. So right now we're on the default layout. We're gonna switch to the 2x3 split. So what this does, or what I like about this, is it puts all of my like folder explorer-y stuff kind of over on one side, and it makes it closer for dragging and dropping, and makes my scene and game both visible at the same time, which is nice. And I'll eventually add some other windows over here to do more stuff. But if again you missed that, we changed our default layout, or our layout of our windows to 2x3. All right, so we're in. We've got some windows that we're looking at. I'm gonna quickly just explain these. The one you're gonna see most quickly, or the one my eye gets drawn to, is the scene view. The scene view is essentially just like a spatial relationship of, or just a spatial representation of what's in your game. So we can see we have got a camera and we've got a light, and both of those show up in our hierarchy, which is just a list or an ordered structure of all of the components that are in our current scene. So that's not everything that's in our game, that's just everything that's in our scene. So if it shows up in the hierarchy, it's going to show up in the scene. These two are going to be identical all the time. All right? Cool. Now when you select an object in either the scene or the hierarchy, the inspector goes, hey, I'm a thing, look at me. And the thing that the inspector tells you is information about that game object. So I'm going to use two words here. I'm going to use game object and component. So game object, for those trying to get a grasp on Unity and understanding these things, the idea of a game object, there's only one kind of game object. Now, I know that this is a game object that says main camera, and this is a game object that says directional light. It doesn't matter what it's called. It doesn't matter what the inspector says about it. A game object is a game object is a game object. And now you have we have two game objects in our scene, so anything in the hierarchy is going to be a game object. And the inspector then shows what components, that's the second word, so what components are attached to the game object. So this is like super, remember this. If you remember anything from this video, you have game objects in your scene, and those game objects are just a collection of components. So the only difference between this directional light and this main camera is that the main camera has the camera component attached to it, while the directional light has the light component attached to it. The main camera has some other components attached to it. We're not going to worry about those. The one thing that they have in common, though, is they have a transform. So every game object is going to have a transform. This is super important. So because it needs to be represented in our scene view, it needs to be represented in 3D space in some way. We have to have some information about where it is, its X, Y, and Z position, which we can see we have an X, Y, and Z axis, so we can change those. And then it has a rotation and a scale. So every game object is going to have a transform component attached to it, and every thing else that makes the game object what it is just a series of components. And that's it. So right now we have a main camera and a directional light. That's going to be in every scene that you start. We're going to add some other game objects, and we're going to start turning this into a game very quickly. So let's use the create tab in the hierarchy, and we're going to, or the create drop down, and we're going to drop in a 3D. Now I would grab a plane, but I'm going to grab a terrain instead so that I don't make you delete it later. So we're going to grab a terrain. So everybody do this with me now. Go tab over to, alt tab over to Unity. If you're in Chrome, or if you don't have two windows, or whatever you're at, and click create in the hierarchy up here, and then 3D object, we're going to pick a terrain object. So the thing that's nice about a terrain object is that it has these terrain components attached to it. So this terrain we'll talk about later, and this terrain collider, we'll talk about colliders here shortly. So I've got three components. I can go ahead and I can actually play my game right now. I can click this play button. It's going to be real boring, but you can see that it starts right down here eventually. There we go. So the button is blue. That means my game is playing. I'm also going to turn on maximize on play and try that again. So I turn maximize on play on my game tab, or game window, and then I click play. The button goes blue, and then my whole screen fills up with my game. And this is nice if I'm trying to test things at a bigger scale, and it's also nice because I know that my game is currently playing, where if I don't maximize on play, I might not know. And the reason why that's important is any changes you make while your game is playing don't get saved out when you stop your game or unplay your game. So this pause button, don't worry about the pause button. To turn your game off, you're going to click the play button to turn it off again, and that'll save you some headaches. Okay, so what are we trying to do right now? We're trying to make a terrain and make a world and drop a character in it. And we're going to essentially use that as a conversation about utilizing Unity. So when I created this terrain object, one interesting thing happened is in the project folder, I got this extra little asset created. So the project folder I haven't talked about yet is the window, or the project window shows all the assets that could be in our scene. So anything that shows up in our scene has probably some anchor or some information inside of the assets folder. Not always the case. So this main camera, it's just using built-in pre-made stuff, components that Unity already knows about, and so it's not going to show up in the assets folder because we don't need to move it. We don't need to care where it's at. So there's that. Okay. But what we want to do is we want to bring a character into our world. So to bring a character into our world, whoa, what am I doing right now? I'm moving around in the scene. I didn't tell you guys about moving around in the scene. So what I'm doing is I'm right-clicking, and when I right-click, I can change where I'm looking. You can see I can right-click and then drag around, and it lets me look kind of like an FPS. And then I get this little WASD thing. So if you're not familiar with video games on the PC, stop this and go play video games on the PC instead. But I right click and then I can use the W key to go forward, the S and the A and D to sort of go backwards and such. I use this maybe more often than I should. You can also hold the shift button is nice. It lets you zip around. There's other ways to navigate in this in the scene view, but I kind of like the sort of scooting around like this. One way to do it is to just double click on an object. So if I double click on in the hierarchy, I double click on the main camera, it sort of zips to that particular object. I can also select an object, move my mouse over to the scene, and press F, and it focuses as well. Alright, so that's kind of navigation in the scene view. But like I said, let's go ahead and put a character into this game because it's real easy. So we imported that characters package. That's going to live inside of the standard assets. What I'm going to do for my project window is I'm going to drag this little slider down so that I can see the full names of things. It makes it so I can see more at a time. I kind of like this view a little bit better for some other stuff too, but just get my window set up. So standard assets. I'm gonna click on characters because I want to bring a character into the world. And you know what? I'm probably gonna bring in this third-person character prefab. So I clicked into third-person character, and then I double-click on prefab. So again, if you pause this and you go hop over to your Unity, or if you tab over to Unity, you click into standard assets, characters, third-person character, prefabs. Awesome. So I'm going to grab this third-person controller, I'm going to drag it straight over to my scene, and you can see I can just kind of drop it in there. I could also put it into my hierarchy and it would eventually show up somewhere, but this is kind of nice because it lets me pinpoint exactly where it's at. And if I look down in my game window, you can kind of see what that will end up looking like. So if I'm just gonna kind of put my character somewhere in the middle, or somewhere off the edge, and then I'm also gonna move my camera because my camera's kind of in a dumb spot. You can see down here what my camera's gonna look like, because every scene needs a camera to run, because it needs to know what viewport to show the player. Okay, so double clicking on main camera, I have these suite of tools, and these tools are sweet. I can use move, I can rotate, I can scale, which doesn't matter for cameras, and then there's this like 2D transform thing that's kind of neat. But I can also use QWERT to swap between those, kind of like hotkeys. I always forget about them, and usually they end up messing me up because I'm trying to move around with the W key, and then I let go of the right mouse button, and I press W, and I end up on move. Anyway, so I have these three axes. So moving this object around, you could just kind of grab it and see what it does, but it's not as precise. So I like to use the arrow keys, or these little arrow grips, because I know that I'm moving along a particular axis. So I want to bring the camera closer, so I'm going to drag here, and then I'm going to get my mouse back. I'm going to grab this red arrow, kind of like that. My camera's kind of on the ground, so I'm going to move it up, and then I'm going to rotate it down a little bit. So whoosh. Now if I click play, you can see I have a character, and the character I haven't even talked about is pretty magical because it already moves around. It already has a bunch of components already attached to it to make it do the things that we want to do. Now this might be a little hard to see because our terrain is all white, but we can change that in just a second. So I'm gonna unpause my game, or unplay my game, and we're gonna dig into this third-person controller for a half second. So this third-person controller that now is in my hierarchy, that's also in my scene, has a ton of components attached to it, and those components are essentially tell it to do different things. So the animator is gonna send information down to the children components. Now you can see I just unfolded this third-person controller has this very tiny triangle here, and if I expand it or unfold it, I can see that there are children inside of this parent. The hierarchical relationship is similar to other programs, but this might be new to you. So I call this third-person controller GameObject, has three child game objects, and then one of them actually also has some children and has been real active in making the babies, because look at all this stuff. But we don't care about any of this stuff right now. But I'm just showing you that there is a hierarchical relationship. That's why it's called the hierarchy. Oof. Knowledge. Okay, so this third-person controller, it's got a thing called an animator that does some stuff for animation, if you can guess. There's a thing called a rigid body, which I'll talk about in a second. There's another collider. This is the second time I've said the word collider. We'll talk about that. And then there are a couple scripts. Now, to be fair, all of these are actually scripts, but some of them are just listed as components in sort of a more useful way. And I'll talk about this stuff in a little bit more detail, but you might have been curious about the existence of all of these things. But again, this third-person controller GameObject is just as dumb as this GameObject here. It just so happens to be that it has a number of components attached to it that make it smart and do cool things like move around like this. What? And I can jump. What? W, A, and D here, doing the spins. This comes pre-installed in Unity. It's a pretty sweet thing. Okay. So I've got a character that'll let me interact with an environment. Let me focus on them. So let's use some of our tricks. I'm going to double click on the third-person controller, and it lets me zoom in, and now I can kind of peek around him. I can be very bad about peeking around him and kind of do this like move thing. All right, so there he is. Boom. We're going to make a box for him to interact with. So I'm going to do it the boring way, as I'm going to click Create 3D Object, and I'll make a cube. And so there's the cube that I can interact with, that my player can now interact with. If I click play right now, I can just go jump on that box. Our box is a little hard to see. Look, and it doesn't do anything like cool like fall. And there's a reason for that. So if we look at the components for this box, it currently has a transform like everything else. It's got a cube mesh filter, a box collider, and a mesh renderer. So if I turn off particular components of this, so like let me turn off this little checkbox here. I'm going to turn off the box collider, and it's going to give you a better idea of what the box collider does. So because I've unchecked the box collider, you can see I can run through. Oh, we still can't see that very well. Let's change that. But I can run through this box. So let's make it so you can see this box a little bit easier before we move too much further. We're going to create a new game object, or we're going to create a new component that we're going to attach to it, and it's called a material. So this is a weird thing about Unity. This is a thing that you might have struggled with already, is that this default material is uneditable. So because it has because this game object is trying to render using the mesh renderer component, the filter mesh that it's using, so this cube mesh, it's trying to take the information about what a cube is and output it to the renderer, and we can see this materials right here, drop down or expandable duder is, for lack of a better term, array maybe? Array. It takes a particular material, and right now that material that it's taking as its value, so this is, you can think of it as a variable, it's taking this default material as its information. It says that's all I know about is this default material. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new material to replace that. So there's a couple easy ways to do that, but we're going to do this the hard way. So inside of the project tab, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to click mouse over to the create button, and I'm going to create a new material. And it's going to want a name, so I'm going to name it red because I'm boring. And now I have a standard material that is using, I have a new material that is using the standard shader, which we won't talk about shaders right now, but that's the thing. You see I can select different ones. It's going to render as opaque, which means it's not translucent, which just means you can't see through it. And I could assign a particular texture to it, but what all I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the color. So by changing the color, I'm going to click this little white square. It's going to bring up my color picker. I can modify the saturation and the hue. So the hue is what kind of color. Saturation is how much of that color. So I'm going to just pick a green because I like green. And then I'm going to close that, and it's automatically selected. So my red is now green. I'm going to change this to red. I forgot. I don't like red as much, but red was easier to type. So, all right, so there we go. So we have a red material. Now I can assign this in a number of ways. One is I can just drag this onto the cube like that, boop, and I can make it red. That's probably the easiest. But the harder way, and the way that shows you more readily what is actually happening, is I can take this red and drag it into the inspector on top of this element 0. Now this can be kind of frustrating because the inspector shows the thing that you are selected or you're looking at. So if I click this red material, the inspector loses what I have selected. So let's say I want to modify this cube and I'm looking at it in the inspector. I see, oh, I want to change that, so I want to use this material, and then it's gone. So I have to pick the cube again, and I look down and I see, okay, I now click and hold, and now I can drag this red guy around, and that lets me leave the cube up. Now there's a drastic measure of you could actually lock, using this very tiny lock button up here, you could lock the inspector so that it stops showing you new things and it only shows you the thing that you have locked. That will get you into trouble because you will often forget, and then you'll wonder why you can't look at your terrain or your material, and you'll cry. Maybe not. Maybe you don't cry. Anyway, so we're gonna make this red. Boom. So now it's red. It's got its box collider back on. Let's move it down on the ground a little bit. So let's move it through this terrain just like that, and I'll click play. And now you can see I can hop on top of it, or I can walk over it actually. So it's a little buggy, but I can walk over it. My character's smart enough to know about it. I'm gonna pause, which is the first time I paused. Pausing because I'm going to modify a thing and then go right back to playing. And also that the thing that I modify, I don't care that it's not saved. So any changes you actually want to make, don't pause your game. I've said that before, I'll say it again. Don't pause your game if you're trying to make changes, because they won't save and you'll be sad. I've done it. It sucks. Alright, so I'm going to uncheck this box collider box. I'm going to go back to my game, and now you can see the collider no longer is telling Unity that that box has any physical space or doesn't take up any space. So that's what a collider does for us. The collider represents, as a component, represents the amount of space an object takes up. So this collider is called a box collider. It's completely unrelated to like the actual view of the object. So if I turn off the mesh renderer, you can see the mesh renderer is actually what displays the mesh itself. And so this mesh and this renderer, you can't have a mesh renderer without a mesh component already attached. Now what I could do is I could actually change the mesh that's assigned to this object. I could select a sphere, and even though this thing is called cube, it now is getting information that it's mesh, the thing that it is that gives it definition of what it looks like is completely different. But the collider though is still a box collider. So when I try and interact with this object, I still can't get close to it because it still thinks that it is a box collider. Let's also change some other things about this box collider. Let's go ahead and change its size. So in the x-axis, I'm going to make it real wide, and then I'm going to click play. I goofed. I'll pause it again. I'm going to make it big, whoosh, and then if I click unpause, you can see I can't actually move through here because my character thinks that he's inside of, or that this object, or the world thinks that this object takes up this much space, even though it doesn't look like it. And that's okay. You can do stuff like that because it's your game and you can make crazy stuff happen. Now the one thing that's weird is that none of this has moved. This box hasn't moved at all. So that's where we get into a new kind of component. So a little bit of recap. The components we've looked at so far have been wildly different and done wildly different things. But the ones that I want you to care about or think about or remember are the ones that make up basic physical objects in Unity. So we have our mesh filter, which describes what our object is going to look like when it is rendered through a mesh renderer. Now this isn't true for like 2D games, so for 2D games we use a sprite renderer, which is different than a mesh renderer. Don't worry about that right now. You might have had the question, I just wanted to cut you off at the pass. So I'm going to pick the cube again. So my mesh filter is now using the information about this cube, and then it's rendering the cube using the material that I assigned to it. Now it had the default material, which it wouldn't let me use. You guys remember, materials are what give mesh renderers, or meshes in general, information about how they show up or how they display. So what I could do is I could set this material to 0, this size value. I think I can. If I say 0 and press enter, and you can see the renderer no longer has a material to use to show anything. So even though the renderer is active, it doesn't have. So now it has no material assigned to it, so it shows up as this weird pink. And so, boom, I'm gonna make it red. Cool. Now, the collider again gives an object its space. Tells Unity this is how much space a thing is going to take up. But in order for things to move and be susceptible to or vulnerable to physics, we have to add a component called a rigid body. So to add a component that doesn't exist, so the last time we added something, we added this red mesh material. We're going to now dig into the add component button, and things are structured very nicely here, but usually you know what you're looking for and you can type it without having to actually use these little boxes. So I'm looking for a rigid body, and I knew that because I know what rigid bodies do, and you know that now too. I actually know that it's inside of physics, and I could click rigid body here and that would work, but usually all I do is type RI and it starts to search for me in the search box, and I can find rigid body, I can press enter, and I can feel very, very snazzy and very, very quick about the work that I do. So if I click play now, this box is going to fall. Boom. And I can also push this box around, and if I push it far enough, it starts to kind of want to tip. Whoosh. And it's getting the information about how it interacts with other objects from our collider. So if I go and I pause my game, and let me sneak over in the scene view. So my game is paused. I can sneak over to the scene view. If I remove, or if I disable this box collider and then unpause my game, the box collider, or the box, the cube itself, is going to fall right through the world because it no longer thinks that it takes up space. But because it has the rigid body, it still knows that it's prone to gravity because it has a mass and it has used gravity set as a Boolean value. So these variables here that show up are public variables that we can modify, and they're handy because the inspector lets us make changes on the fly to our game. They're less stable per se than doing this through script, because our setting values through scripts, because if it changes in the inspector, it's less reliable. Like if you lose the scene, then you lose that information, kind of. So at least that's what I found. So if I turn use gravity off and I click play, this box doesn't fall, but it's not stationary. You can see it's prone to physics, and then it just runs right away. Ah, my player has run past my camera. So let's figure out a good camera fix so that we can see objects. So let me go and turn my game off. So far our camera's been stationary. What we're going to do is we're going to move it. We're going to recall some of the skills we just used. We're going to move our camera using the move tool. We're going to bring it just behind our player so that we can kind of position it in the right spot. And then we're going to just use a dirty hack. And the dirty hack is we're going to move this main camera as a child of our third-person controller. So if I drag, click and hold in the hierarchy, the main camera, and I drag it so that you can see there's kind of two options. One is between and one is on. So if I drag it onto the third person controller, my main camera is now a child of my third person controller. And if I click play, you can see my camera is now going to have to follow the rotation and position of my character. And so this is useful if I'm trying to make objects whose positions are relative to other objects stay that way without any kind of script or code. The game just knows that that's what you're supposed to do. Okay. So I've got a character, I've got kind of an object that I can interact with. We kind of talked about the basics of colliders, rigid bodies, and all the components that make it so that this physical object acts how you would expect a physical object to act. One last thing is this box collider. We never really modified the box collider, so let me do that. Let me remove this box collider and instead add a sphere collider. So what I did here is I created a script called SP because I'm bad at this. Let's remove that component. Let's delete that script. Whoosh. Delete. Yeah. Be careful when you delete things in assets. Okay. So I've removed the component. Again, I'll add the box collider back for just a second. Box collider. And you'll see I clicked this very tiny little cog next to this book and I just said remove component. And that just lets me get rid of it so that now, just like before, this object would fall through the world. But instead of disabling or adding a box collider back, I'm going to add a sphere collider. Adding a sphere collider now means that this box thinks that it takes up the space of a sphere. So if I go and push it around, you can see it rolls like a ball or a sphere. So just hammering home the point that when you're messing with objects, particularly Unity created objects, you're gonna be looking at the components attached to an object. So that's the thing that I want you to take away from this, is that each of these game objects has some number of components attached to them, and those components are what dictates what that game object does. There's nothing special about this light other than it has a light component. Okay, I've said it a lot. It's just one of the most important things that I think you can start to wrap your brain around to make it so that you're better at Unity. Okay, so now if you're following along, just kind of putzing around doing weird stuff, let's do one more thing before we get too far. I'm also going to change a different kind of material on this collider, which is the physics material. Now the physics material is nice because it changes how the object sort of interacts with things. So if I make it bouncy, so again I've clicked this very tiny little circle here, and then I clicked bouncy. Because bouncy is a particular material. It's inside of the standard assets physics materials. You can see bouncy, it has some values attached to it just like all of these physics materials do. But if I click play, you'll be able to see that this thing bounces like a ball now. And I can push it around and it'll kind of bounce. It still has that sphere collider, so it kind of bounces away. I think that's pretty cool. Maybe you don't, but you're probably not watching anymore if you don't. So, okay. Whew, we're covering a lot, I hope. So, beyond that, I want to do one more thing. I want to make it so that this terrain that we're on, that we created for a particular reason, looks a little bit better than it does. So, the terrain component, this is a kind of component that is real powerful and kind of understated when you think of the terrain as the game object that is the terrain, but really the thing that makes this terrain are the tools, are these 6 tools, 7 tools, and they're real basic, but I'm just going to quickly walk through them because you can kind of see how powerful it is to quickly modify it and shape this terrain. So this one's real easy. I can raise and lower. So if I have a brush, I pick raise and lower, I pick which brush I want, and then you can see I get some blue dots and I can raise and lower terrain. So raising is just clicking and holding. Lowering is holding shift and then clicking and holding. So whoosh, I can kind of undo and get my terrain going. So that's nice if you're trying to do like some cool looking mountains or something. So let's do like maybe this guy and do some kind of like big old mountains. Now these mountains look kind of jagged, so I'm gonna smooth them out. I'm gonna use the third tool, which is the smooth tool, and I'm gonna turn the opacity down on it so that I can kind of just smooth out these mountains a little bit so they don't look as crappy. I'm gonna kind of float around them, whoosh, kind of like this, whoosh, and kind of smooth out, so they're not as jagged. Whoosh. I'm gonna increase the size of my brush so that's a little bit bigger, so it applies a more uniform smooth. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. There we go. Okay, and then I'm gonna paint a texture. Well, actually, let me do the last terrain modifier. Is we can modify the height by a flat particular height. So let's say I want to make like a 10-foot or 10 unit high like plateau. I can use this brush here, and I'm gonna turn the brush size back down. I can kind of flatten out this particular area so that in level design that's kind of nice because flat areas are easier to build things on and maybe look more man-made, and you see it's not going any higher than that, and just the area around it kind of grows as much as it needs to make it look realistic. Okay, so this is all well and good, but it's also very boring to look at. And did I break? I think I broke Unity for a second. Oh well. But now we want to change the sort of the overall look of this thing. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's use our brush texture. Now we don't have a texture set already, so what we need to do is, oh weird, did I lock? Huh. So brush texture, we need to edit and add a texture, and we're just going to add an albedo. So I clicked whatever brush, doesn't matter. I clicked edit textures, add texture, and then the albedo, I clicked this very tiny select button here. I didn't click the name, I clicked select, and then I'm going to look for grass. Oh, I don't have it because I don't have the standard assets that I need. We'll do that in part 2. So stick around for part 2. Okay, so by part 2 I just meant that I'm gonna go eat a snack and then come back. So that's what I just did. You missed that. That's okay though. It was a good snack. It was yogurt. You don't care about that. Okay, so I've saved this scene and I had to restart because I had some issues with my looky peek thing that I like to overutilize. So I saved this little scene as test scene. To do that, I clicked File, and I clicked Save Scene, or sorry, Save Scene As will bring up the actual box, and I just call it Test because I'm unoriginal. Okay, we need that terrain texture though, and to get it, we have to import some assets. So when we set up our project, we imported some standard assets, that character package, awesome. But we can get assets from lots of places, and this is another like brain thing that your game is as good as the assets you bring to it. And so if you use these standard assets, it will look fine, but it'll be a prototype game. So you need a way to get assets. There's lots of ways to do that. One would be to hit up the asset store. So I'm gonna click window, I'm gonna go to the old asset store, and you can see I can search for very cool things that people are selling. So part of working in Unity is deciding what it is that you want to do, and maybe you don't want to make models of forests, or maybe you really don't care about making your characters, so you'll grab characters from the asset store and you'll drop those in. But the key thing is it's up to you. And wherever you decide to get your assets is wherever you're going to decide to get your assets. For now, I'm going to stick to the standard assets that everybody has access to, and then we might deviate in another series. All right, so I'm going to close this tab, this asset store tab, and I'm going to click on assets up here. I'm going to import a package, and the package I'm importing is the environment package. So I click on that. It's going to decompress it, which is going to take a long time, so we'll speed it up. Never mind. We are now going to get the option to pick what we can import. Now, some of this already came in during our character asset package, so this stuff is unchecked. But you can see all of these very fancy things right here, the trees and stuff are new, so we're going to import those. So I'm going to go ahead and click import, and it's going to dump them into my project folder. And this will take a while, and so I won't be able to be with you the whole time. We're going to speed this one up for sure. Okay, so now we have access to this environment section, which is very powerful and great. So we'll utilize it how we were planning to utilize it in the first place, which is to add some grass to this terrain. So I click this terrain game object. I hop over to the brush tab part piece in the terrain component. Again, I don't care about what brush. Edit textures, add textures, select the very tiny select, and then I can browse. I'm just going to search for grass, and this is what I want, this grass hill albedo. I double click, and then I'm just going to add it as is. I could change the tiling and some other stuff, but I'm just going to click add, and you can see I have grass. It's all grassy. Now this mountain here shouldn't be grassy, so we're going to change that. We're going to click edit textures, add texture. We're going to find a new texture. We're going to call it grass again because there's this grass rock. I'll double click on that. Again, no normal. I won't worry about that right now. Add texture. Grass. Add. There we go. Now I have to select it, so there's this little blue line. I go, and you can see I can select different ones. But now I have this brush tool that lets me kind of paint on this texture. And I can change both the brush size and the opacity. So the opacity, if I make it real opaque, every time I click, it applies as much of it as it possibly could. So I can turn that down so I have a little bit more finer control over how it blends the two. So you can kind of see, like, I can kind of blend it a little bit more to make it look a little more organic. So we'll take a second to explore this. If I click play, you can see I have jump skills, not very good jump skills. But you can see that our level is starting to look maybe a little bit more realistic, or a little bit less bad, less bad. I'm going to move my character so that he's not just like right on the edge. I'm going to move him to the middle of my terrain. So let me click on my third person controller. And I know that my terrain object is like is 500 by 500. So I'm just going to move his position in the X and the Z to 255 or 250. I do 255 because I'm too lazy to hit the 0. I just hit 5 twice because it's close enough. Yep, that's the kind of human being that I am. And then here we'll do 255 as well, and we'll do 222. And then if I look around, and I press that cube, press F, and that's a little far away. We'll be not that lazy. We'll do 250. Now if I click play, you can see I got that bouncy cube. And I'm kind of in the middle of this grass area instead of like on the edge where I could fall off. So, awesome. Back to the terrain, we've got a couple more cool tools. Let's find our character again. Press F. Whoosh. I'm going to go back. I'm going to add some hills in this area. Whoa, too big. Add some hills in this area. Like that. Kind of make it so my ball can't go too far, or my rolly box. And then I'm gonna swap to trees. Trees we can brush on just like anything else. We just have to again define the texture for the tree. So this is in the environments package. Again, I click edit trees, add tree, tiny little circle, And I'm gonna get this broadleaf desktop. So this one right here, and add. And now I have a tree, and I can do one thing I could do is I could just mass place trees and put it all over the scene. But here I'm actually just gonna decrease my density of trees and decrease my brush size a little bit, and I'll kind of just click. And the first tree set is always takes the longest, so it's got to think about it. But you can kind of see as I maybe a little bit bigger brush size will do, and we'll do whoosh. There's some other options you can kind of see that we can modify, but I can very quickly make a real deal forest that my player is inside of. Whoosh. And I'm kind of already making some cool stuff happen. Look at that. We can do the same thing with grass, but I'm going to leave it off because grass kind of makes the machine chug a little bit. But I'm going to add water really quick. So usually the better way to add water is to, when you first get your terrain, increase the maximum height, or increase the base height by just like a set value. Because right now my terrain can't go any lower, and so usually when you're making water, you can kind of think that water usually forms in like the lowest point, like bodies of water, rivers. You don't need me to talk about hydrology, but essentially water's at the bottom of things, and so the fact that you have this terrain starts where it's at the bottom, like it's the lowest it'll go, and you can't make it any lower. That means you have to either just right off the bat change it so that you right off the bat have to change your terrain so that I had a little bit of lag there. You're changing the terrain so that it's not on its lowest point and it's easier to like dip down. But what I'm doing is I'm just going to make like a little plateau to start where my little water basin is going to be, and I'm going to increase my brush size, my opacity to speed this up, and I'm just going to whoosh, there we go. So there's like a nice flat area. Alright, and then I'm going to use the indentation and make like a little hold Z and kind of make a flat, then decrease my brush size a little bit. Kind of make that this is where my lake is gonna go. Lakes usually have like a muddy bottom instead of a grassy bottom, so I'm gonna get mud rock, switch over, add, and then I can kind of brush that on. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Kind of like that. Increase my, yeah, there we go. Okay. And then I'm going to add this little water thing. It's under water prefabs. So it was water prefabs. I'm kind of speeding this up a little bit so that you can just sort of see it. Oh, it's broken. Ooh, gross. So our material for water pro daytime looks funny right now. So if we go FX water, let's see if we switch it to a standard shader, that doesn't work. And so if we switch it FX water pro daytime, why do you look dumb? Your normal maps there. Simple water horizon. Water mode refractive. Simple. Reflective. It's not going to change it. You can kind of see I'm filling this, but sad days. Material doesn't have a flow. Oh, yep. So this is an error. This is fun. You guys get to see some inside baseball here. This material doesn't have the appropriate, so this is an error with Unity, a bug of sorts. So what we need to do is we need to edit the shader. Oh no, Visual Studio! I should have switched to Mono Develop. Visual Studio is great. Everybody loves Visual Studio. It takes a long time to load, and I like Mono Develop better. So you can see this upgrade. Object world has been replaced with the Unity object world. What we need to do is we actually need to. This is broken still. So Control F, and we need to find Unity object world. Yeah, object to world. Is that right? Unity object to world. We need to replace all instances of Unity object to world with, what was it? This one. Copy. So we go and say paste. Now we could do a find replace here, but I'm lazy. Alright. And then we save it, and then we minimize, and there's another instance of it somewhere. I think, nope, Control F. Unity underscore, okay, nope. Alright, there we go. So it's still showing up as errors on some of the things, but we'll leave that alone for now. You can see though, this looks okay. So if I click on this Water Pro Daytime again, I'll pull it up a little bit, I'll expand it out, whoosh, kind of like that. Whoa, it's too far. This is cheaty water. Whoosh. And then we'll scale it. It's probably not the way you do this. There's probably a better way to do this, but actually what we'll do is we'll change our terrain, grow our terrain a little bit more, just to give us a flat enough so our terrain doesn't hide. Oof. There we go. Now we take our character, and we click play. And if you want more detail about this, I'm happy to sort of dig into what just happened. But there was essentially an error with the way that Unity was upgrading their standard assets. But the cool thing about this water is that it actually uses a camera, and the camera then displays an image of the reflection. Now this water isn't actually water, it's just the idea, or a plane of water. So if I go under here, you can see it's pretty basic down here. There's nothing too crazy, and it doesn't act like water. It doesn't change how I move, but ooh, I gotta adjust my character. But yeah, it looks okay. It could look worse, right? So we're building out this terrain, we're building out this world, we're using the terrain component to build out this world. That was our goal. I'm not a huge fan of this character, this Ethan Duder. I kind of like a first-person adventure better, particularly since if I go with this Ethan third-person character, then I'm sort of prone to, or I have to play by the aesthetic rules of a guy with a faux hawk, or that's a real mohawk. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna swap that out, and then maybe we'll cut this and do one on animations and such and other components later. So last thing we're gonna do, sort of a culmination after that sort of big food mess thing, is we're going to delete our third-person controller. And now you can see our scene's missing a camera, so our game's not going to show anything. And we're going to go back to standard assets, going to go back to characters, click into our first-person character, and we're going to prefab. And if I didn't say it, a prefab is essentially just like a set of instructions for a character, or for a game object. So you can see this one, it's essentially these components. So this FPS controller, it's these components plus this child. So we have a camera as a child, again, kind of like we did with our third person, so it's going to follow us. And then we have what's called a character controller, we've got a rigid body, and we've got an audio source. So let's click this FPS controller and just drag it into our scene, kind of right there. I'm gonna move it up a little bit, move it back down a little bit, whoosh, and then I'll click play. And this one might make sound actually. Yeah, makes a lot of sound. But now I have this first-person character that can experience this game in a little bit more sort of. I think it's just a little bit better. I don't know what it is about this first person versus the third person controller. I feel like I can design an experience more quickly this way. And so that's what we're gonna do. I think we'll take essentially a basic terrain and we'll keep growing it out, and we'll add a non-player character in our next series, just to sort of talk about how different components interact with different windows. So that seems like a good place to go. I'm also open to suggestions. This is a completely new series. I'm putting the introduction at the end so you can skip it. But I do a little bit of teaching of this stuff to kids, and I've been doing a lot of that in person, and I've been looking to grow a web series essentially of the information that I share and the classes that I teach, just to get people excited about this and show how easy it is, because when I started I was very daunted by all of this, but it's very easy to grok, and it's very easy to sort of master if you can get there. So thanks for watching. I'm gonna do more of these. I'm open to suggestions on what next, but I'm gonna keep plugging away on just using Unity, understanding how Unity works, and yeah, that's the long and the short of it. So thanks for watching. Until next time.